This video is sponsored by Squarespace. After last weekend's race in Baku, the conversation around porpoising was louder than ever. Lewis got absolutely battered by his Mercedes. It was pretty uncomfortable watching, seeing him get out of that car. And he wasn't the only driver who was complaining about porpoising issues. Russell, Ricciardo, Magnussen, Gasly, all very vocal afterwards. I think it's fair to say that the wider perception of porpoising is no longer just a discomfort thing, but an actual safety thing. Question is, what next? The FIA step in? Do the teams just have to deal with it themselves? And if there were changes, what should they be? Because quite uncharacteristically, it's been kicking off on F1 Twitter and I've been dragged for my opinion, so let's just make a video. Let's talk about it. So let's start with the problem and just remind ourselves what exactly porpoising is. I'll keep this brief. These new ground effect cars are very efficient at keeping the car stuck to the road without generating all that horrible dirty air that we used to get. Better wheel-to-wheel racing. Lovely jobby. I think it's all in all done a pretty good job this year. But you need to run the car very, very low to the ground to get the maximum out of these Venturi tunnels under the car to generate the most suction. Like back when ground effect was first pioneered in Formula 1 back in the 80s, they used to run side skirts that would run along the floor to seal it and maintain that pressure difference. Like if you compare last year's car to this year's car, you can see these ones barely have any rake at all, which is the angle from the kind of front to back. Red Bull used to run quite high rake. Now all the cars run pretty much parallel to the ground to minimize that gap and seal those floors as best as they can. But then the big old bouncy porpoise comes along and ruins everyone's fun when the car gets too low to the ground because there's too much suction. It stalls out, that pushes the car back up, and this happens rapidly, turns into oscillation, and that's the porpoising that we all know and don't love. That's my very rudimentary description of what porpoising is, but check out Carl Engineering's video, link above. He goes into full double detail on it. Would recommend. I don't want it in the sport, you don't want it in the sport, and the drivers definitely don't want it in the sport, especially Lewis. Well, you know what is mad? Lewis Hamilton has many things, he has his finger in many pies, but he doesn't seem to have his own website. There's a bunch of fan sites, but you can. That's right, with today's video sponsor, Squarespace, you can build your very own website. Thousands of drag and drop templates available to make it super easy, no coding knowledge needed, 24/7 customer support. I've been using them for years and I couldn't recommend them more highly. Best thing of all, you can try Squarespace out completely free of charge, have a play around with the functionality, see if you like it or not, and not have to pay anything. It's only when you want to put your website that you're happy with live to the world that you do. And when that time inevitably comes, head to squarespace.com/TommoF1 to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Actually, Lewis, if you're watching, do it. Look, lewishamilton.com is literally just a picture of you. You can do better. So how do we get rid of this horrible porpoise that's been corrupting this 2022 Formula 1 season? What is the solution? Well, we've heard consistently this year that the problem is ride height. Lower the ride height, you induce more porpoising, but then you get more performance because you are closer to the ground, so typically your ground effect is working better. If you raise the ride height, you porpoise less, but then you go slower. Now this is where it's difficult because F1 teams are always going to do what they can to prioritize performance, right? I mean, you got teams taking paint off of their cars, for crying out loud. And the drivers as well, you got to say typically a driver would be prepared to accept a level of discomfort if it meant they're able to go faster and more likely to win. But there's discomfort and then there's danger. And what we saw in Azerbaijan, like you could definitely argue there were a few snaps as well where Lewis is porpoising, going through high speed corners and you're getting snaps of oversteer. There's that, but more to the point, I think, is the actual damage that's potentially doing to your body. No driver should have to tolerate that. Now, some cars have suffered with porpoising more than others, but also some cars have been better at managing that than others. So the Ferrari, for example, right? Quickest car in qualifying, has had some mad porpoising throughout the season. Australia, that first lap, I will not forget that in a while because that car was going crazy. But compared to the Mercedes, the Ferraris seem to have a better handle on when it porpoises. So for example, if you're going in a straight line and you porpoise, you're not going to lose as much performance as if you're porpoising going through like a high speed corner where that's going to make you go way slower if it's jumping about, you know. Now it is worth mentioning that I have seen quotes from Toto Wolff suggesting that just raising the ride height wouldn't get rid of it in that Mercedes anyway. Now, is that true? Because we've been hearing all season that this is essentially very tunable out if the teams want to sacrifice performance. I'm not sure. I'm a bit cynical, I'll be honest. Because look, at the end of the day, and I don't begrudge him for doing this, every team principal, not just Toto, is going to try and promote a solution that his Mercedes team can benefit from the most. Would an FIA enforced change likely help the Mercedes out relative to the field because they're struggling with it the most? Although I personally haven't seen Toto suggest what he actually thinks the solution should be. Maybe it has been oversimplified in the way that we've been talking about it and simply just, oh, raise the ride height and it will be fine. Maybe it isn't that simple, but I would be surprised given the amount of coverage we've had into porpoising if raising a ride height wouldn't be a quick fix for everyone broadly. So what do I think? What does Tommo think we should do about porpoising? Because clearly I have the power to make broad sweeping changes in Formula 1. Because look, we want a solution that is going to keep the drivers as safe as possible to get rid of the porpoising, but also preserves as much competitive fairness and integrity as possible. Now, at first, my reaction was very much, this is the team's problem to solve. The responsibility is on the team to not compromise their drivers' health. And if they can't engineer around the problem, raise your car up and take the L. Do I understand that the rules could be changed to force the teams to not be able to make that decision? Yes, and we will get onto that later. But this was my kind of initial reaction. In fact, on Talking Points, my podcast with Matt, Hayden, Aldas, link above, go like and subscribe. We talked all about it, and on there that was very much my stance. But after that I was doing a bit more digging, a bit more reading into it, and actually I think my perspective has changed a bit. I do think Mercedes and all these teams have a duty of care to these drivers, to their employees essentially, to give them a car that they can race. They can go racing for 50, 60, 70 laps and come back without all of the discs having exploded out of their backs. I don't think that's too much to ask. And I think a lot of this is kind of a philosophical debate, and this is an age-old thing with politics and sport and work. It's like, who is the responsibility on? Is it the individual or is it the owner? I still fundamentally agree with a lot of what I was saying, but I think because I didn't like the solution being proposed when people were talking about the FIA needs to step in, that's why I rejected that route and was just like, no, teams need to deal with it. Because I still don't think it was right for Mercedes to send Lewis out in that car set up in that way. I think Toto afterwards felt pretty bad because everyone could see just how much it had affected Lewis. But if you mandate a minimum ride height for everyone, you will unfairly affect the teams who aren't struggling with it anywhere near as much. However, there is a third way, and this way I think solves the problem but doesn't take away from the teams who have actually managed the porpoising properly. I'd also argue that this solution actually does more to get rid of porpoising because let's just say Toto is right and just raising the ride height doesn't get rid of it for them. Well then, you're not necessarily fixing the problem for everyone. So I think the FIA should mandate a ruling where there is a maximum amount of vertical G-force or vertical acceleration or oscillation. I'm not exactly sure what the best one is to measure. There are people much cleverer than me who can decide what that is. They have the sensors. It's been measured at up to 6G at times, which is a ridiculous amount. But yeah, mandate a maximum amount of porpoising. Basically, a car is allowed to generate during the race. You know, let the teams play around with settings in FP1, 2 and 3 maybe to get that ride height that doesn't cause excessive porpoising. I do think that as much as we can sit here and say we need to completely get rid of porpoising, I don't know if in ground effect cars, if that's possible. I think there has to be a tolerance there, at least in the short term, and maybe the teams can engineer a solution where it is a complete thing of the past. Hopefully, that'd be great. And maybe the FIA should look at the regulations on suspension, particularly, I think, for next year. Definitely not a mid-season suspension change, but look ahead, why not? But what this solution does is forces the team to do the right thing by their driver, but then the teams who have got a good hold on it aren't being punished. Because we have seen from numerous teams, again, Alfa Romeo, Alpine, Red Bull, that you can design a car within these regulations with these, thinner wall tyres and this stiffer suspension, have performance and not excessively porpoise. Everyone's got it to an extent, but we're 8 races in to a brand new set of regulations. It's an engineering challenge that is already being overcome by some of these teams. I don't think any solution is completely foolproof. I'm sure there will be downsides to it, but I think of all the solutions that are available, a solution that can be acted on very quickly, look, it will be a tough pill to swallow for a team like Mercedes because they'll have to raise the ride height, and that will probably push them down the grid a bit in the short term. But at the end of the day, and I'm not being funny, but Mercedes have designed a car that is the third quickest car, but it's only that quick when it's ruining the drivers' backs. Ferrari have designed a car that can be the quickest car, but does also have to porpoise at times. You know, Red Bull have probably got the best hold on it. Even the Alpine, you look how quick they were going down the straights, and, you know, they weren't porpoising seemingly anywhere near as much as like the AlphaTauri and Daniel Ricciardo in McLaren. He had a tough time of it as well. But I tell you what, bloody hell, I put this opinion on Twitter, okay, and honestly, like, because, you know, sometimes you'll like put something out there and you'll be like, oh, okay, it's an opinion and maybe it'll upset some people, but, you know, sometimes your takes are a bit more controversial than others, right? I didn't see this coming at all with this one. Don't get me wrong, like, people disagree with me all the time and that's fine, but I didn't think it would be like controversial in terms of like a partisan issue. I genuinely never considered it would be seen through the whole Red Bull versus Mercedes lens, which is still very, you know, rife at the moment. Maybe I was naive, to be fair, because obviously, you know, Red Bull were doing really well. They're at the top of the championship. They've got a good handle on the porpoising. Mercedes still doing pretty well, still third best car, but their porpoising is really struggling at the minute, and Lewis is taking an absolute battering. So maybe I should have seen that this would be a partisan fit, but it shouldn't be. I've been told I don't care about driver health because I'm literally proposing a solution that mandates a maximum amount of porpoising. Like, what? There's literally one solution that gets rid of porpoising and maybe doesn't with the ride heights and is unfair, and there's one solution that definitely gets rid of porpoising and is more fair. What? I've been told that I want Red Bull domination because the Ferrari porpoises a lot. So if they mandated a change, that would probably hurt the Ferrari more than the Red Bull. Which, I mean, I want Charles Leclerc to win the title, but what do I know about my own opinion? And I've been told that it's not fair because Mercedes have been unfairly targeted by rule changes in the past. Which actually, like, I agree with. I didn't think the nerfing of the Mercedes in the end of 2020 was fair, to be honest. I think it was pretty clear that those changes were designed specifically to hurt the Mercedes. I agree, but two wrongs don't make a right. Just because there's been unfair changes in the past, that's completely irrelevant to the here and now, to this porpoising issue. You should do the right thing because it's the right thing, not because there's been wrong things done in the past and then do the opposite. Look, honestly, I know you lot know this because, like, I talk about these teams all the time, and, like, I'm conditioned 29 years of supporting the indefensible that is West Ham. Like, I like to think I've got a pretty good distinction between my, you know, favourites and my criticism. Albon had a shocker in Monaco and I called him out for it more than a lot of people did, actually. You sophisticated YouTube viewers know full well that I could not give a toss which team is more or less affected. Red Bull are leading, they're looking very good at the minute. Why would Christian want any changes? But it's not just Red Bull people saying that this would be unfair. Brundle went on Sky Sports earlier this morning and said he didn't think it was fair. Brundle was more like, well, the teams need to sort it out themselves, which, again, I think that, you know, it would be great if Mercedes could sort it out themselves and you know, didn't have to mandate a change. But I think for the interest of driver safety, I wouldn't be against having a maximum amount of porpoising allowed. And look, I get it, okay? I know there's a lot of fans that are primarily motivated by a back in their corner. So whatever Christian Horner says, they will support and endorse. Whatever Toto Wolff says, they will support and endorse. But honestly, to me, that's just boring. Imagine if I was just defending Alex Albon every single weekend, whether he had a good one or not. Where's the interesting debate and dynamic and conversation there? It's just like, that's standom. I'm not about it's fandom that I'm here for. And to me, this is a completely bipartisan issue that we should want to get on top of, primarily for the driver's safety, but also to preserve competitive integrity and fairness of the sport. And I think everyone should be on board with that, even if your team might lose out. That's what I think, but what's the solution? Maybe I'm just full of nonsense. Let me know in the comments below. These things are rarely black and white, so I'd love to hear your thoughts and feelings. My name has been Tommo, as it usually is. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Thanks again. Have a good one. Ta-da.